Hello. My name is Andrew. I run a Twitch channel called Grey Vested Nomad, which I do for video gaming purposes. I thought I would make this video giving my first impressions on this accessory I got called the Mayflash 103, a adapter for allowing a Nintendo 64 controller to be played through USB on either a Switch or on Windows. Again, this is kind of more of a first impressions than a full-on review, but I've gotten it all working for the most part. I've given it a little bit of a test, and I would say right off the bat, my opinion is that it is a satisfactory item. And perhaps I should explain a little bit more about that to help you understand that. So, there is my Nintendo 64 controller. And if you'll look over here, I have the adapter sitting over here. As you can see, it's got 3 buttons. The middle one is the home button, which, switches between the software and the home screen for the Switch. The other 2 are turbo buttons, which I have not tried out as I do not have a use for them. It connects right into the one of the USB ports on my Switch. And I haven't untangled it, as I don't have much need for the space, but there's a decent bit of wiring left over, so if you would need this for the purposes of having it on a TV away from a couch, it should work for that, between the length of cable on just the adapter itself plus whatever length you have on your given Nintendo 64 controller. Now, in order to make this work, basically what winds up happening is basically it functions as sort of like a normal Switch controller, but obviously some buttons are missing for the sake of, there's just not enough buttons to match onto what is on a Switch controller. So there's no X or Y button, no ZL, ZR triggers that could be mapped to anything. Well, actually, the Z tracks to ZL, so that works. And the functions out of the box are mostly, it works, but I would say the main issue that I have with this is that if you really want it to work the way that it needs to, you need to make sure to update the firmware. Thankfully, the firmware is pretty painless to update. It's kind of a matter of you go to the website, you find the link for the N64 adapter, you download this executable for it. For whatever reason, you have to press the home button on the Mayflash adapter as you plug it in, and you press the update button after that, and it updates it. And thankfully, you only have to update the latest thing, and it gives you everything you need, because the biggest issues with this adapter is that right out of the box, it's not the best. For whatever reason, the A and B buttons are swapped in terms of their input. The C buttons are inverted. And apparently there's a few other issues that can happen in some of the games with things like running not occurring correctly with the analog stick. That being said, once I did get the adapter's firmware fully, updated, it works out pretty decently. I'll go ahead and show you a little bit of gameplay with it. So, clicking on this, and let's go ahead and play Mario 64 because that's a pretty good judge for the controller. The game is basically built around it. So, starting out here, it's pretty responsive. A does the jumping like it's supposed to. You can do punching. You can turn the camera, zoom in, all that fun stuff. So you can see that it does what it needs to. And it works pretty well. The very first time I managed to get everything updated and everything playing as it should, for some reason there were some issues with the analog inputs for a while. I'm not sure what that issue was exactly, but it went away when I put the Switch into and then out of sleep mode. It's only happened that one time so far, but it's worked out. That could also happen because I'm using an aftermarket controller. Maybe the inputs weren't exactly what it needed, but it could just as easily been in the adapter. But again, it's been working pretty decently otherwise ever since that first attempt to put the Switch into sleep. Now, there is a issue in that you might kind of wonder this. Now, because this adapter has a home button, you can easily go out and back in, and you can go between software pretty easily. And when it comes to just doing straight up software like that, it's okay. But you run into an issue when it comes to using the Switch online thing. Which is that what happens when you want to mess around with save states, or you want to go play a different Nintendo 64 game. You cannot do that with just the N64 controller and the adapter alone. Because in order to do that, you need to press what is the minus or select button on what is normally the Switch controller, which we do not have here or on the adapter, unfortunately. So what you wind up needing to do then is, if you want to be able to mess around with save states and swap between software, is you got to do a little bit of a do-si-do. You go home. You have another controller on standby. A Switch controller that has all of the standard buttons. And so what winds up happening is you get the other controller on there. You go over to the controllers option on the home menu. Change grip. Make sure that the full Switch controller is player 1. You go back into the Nintendo 64 Switch Online thing, and then you can press the select button and you can choose to load or create a save state or any of the other things. And then once you want to go back in and play the game with the N64 controller, you then just have to go back in over here, select controllers, change grip, press the L and R button on the 64 controller, and then you're back to being able to use this for, playing stuff with the N64 controller. And I think that's kind of the last big worry that I had to share regarding that. So what I ultimately say is kind of the takeaway. As I said before, this adapter is, for the most part, satisfactory. It's not perfect, but it works for what I need it for. That is being able to play a Nintendo 64 game with a Nintendo 64 controller on my Switch. Just because the thing is, the Nintendo 64 controller, you can kind of see for yourself, it's a very uniquely designed controller. And just because of how the arrangements are with how the A and the B button on the 64 controller versus the Switch controller are in very different positions. So when you try to call upon muscle memory like I have, I've been playing Nintendo 64 games since I was young, and so I have a very particular way that I feel like I need to press and hold the buttons and all that. I want to be able to play Nintendo 64 games in that fashion. I'll be honest, I probably would have gone for the official Nintendo Nintendo 64 controller for Switch if I could, but that's indefinitely out of stock. And this does a decent job of filling in the gap until that is available. This adapter is selling for about $24 US before taxes and shipping. And I think that's pretty fair for what I'm looking for. Depending on what you're going for, you might be shelling out another 15-20 bucks for an aftermarket 64 controller to go along with this. But thankfully I have this and a few other kinds of controllers to go along with this. And I would say I've found it to be worth it so far. I'm looking forward to playing some more games using the intended controller, at least as much as can be intended. Because as nice and fully featured as a decent Switch controller is, there's something about the muscle memory, the feel of it, that I really do need to be able to have the full controller here, especially since there's just some things that don't quite entirely fit. Like, I gotta remember sometimes that, like, the X and Y buttons are meant to be certain C buttons, but it doesn't always work out, especially since, again, the A and B buttons are moved around, and it's just kind of a weird thing. So yeah, if you are looking for a way to play the Nintendo 64 games on your Switch using a Nintendo 64 controller, the Mayflash 103 is sufficient. So yeah, hopefully this helps you if you are making any considerations on this yourself.